I'm Ting-Yi Oei. Katie gave you some of my background before. One other thing, just in terms of kind of identity, I recently come up with sort of my own moniker of, ABC, American-born Chinese, but I'm ABCD, American-born Chinese Dutch, because my mother was Dutch. So I think now, that kind of covers it. My father was actually overseas Chinese from the Dutch East Indies, but that's my Asian-American connection. There's a way of what we are going to be talking about here today that I think about trying to affect change in the curriculum that I look at it from 4 different perspectives. How do we affect teachers? How do we affect students? How do we impact public institutions? I'm talking about the schools, school divisions, politics, other institutions like libraries, museums, and get them to look at things differently, and also the community. So here, we got a grant, 1882 Foundation, last year and a little bit of the year before from Virginia Humanities. And that was to do a series of 5 traveling seminars where we featured 1 or 2 short films, including a short version of the Chinese Exclusion Act, other things like Through Chinatown's Eyes, which some of you saw before, and other symposia we have shown Finding Samuel Lowe and Finding Cleveland, all little bits and pieces of the Chinese-American experience. And this was one that we did for Arlington teachers, and that's where I think the multiplier effect really comes in. You're trying to get teachers to embed materials that they may not be familiar with at all, and try to get it into the curriculum. So forgetting about standards and all those things for the moment, if you can convince teachers they've got content that's worth embedding into their curriculum, and then leave it up to them to try to bring it there, that's really important. So this was another part of it. The person in the previous slide was who was teaching there was Janelle Wong, who's from the University of Maryland, their Asian American Studies Department. This was Larissa Lam, who's speaking about the film that she and her husband helped make, Finding Cleveland, Mississippi, a reference to the Chinese in the Mississippi Delta community, of which Stan Liu is a perfect representative, and speak to him more about some of that. But there's some very interesting stories about that. And again, a piece of American history that's not very well known. I'll refer to that back in a little bit because it is something that really could be taught as part of every standard. A lot of what standards are, and I'll talk about that again in a minute too, is how can teachers take information that's good and solid and important and put it into the standards in a way that's meaningful for students. It's not like having to stand and digging and finding other things. How can you make the content that we have from the Chinese and Asian American experience really relevant to people who are sitting there, students, but also, of course, the teachers. But we did do the struggle to try to implement things that are part and parcel of state standards and how you get things through. It's a little bit difficult to read some of these things here, so if I get maybe a couple of our volunteers to just pass these out here. People here, just do that. See if people are using that. Great, thank you. But just in passing, you'll see that there are some things that we suggested as an organization. There were 2 organizations, 1882, and at the time, the Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans of Virginia, that I still am a part of and involved with. They're a public policy group in Virginia that tries to get and advocate for Asian American interests in the Commonwealth. So, as most states do, they go through a review of their standards and also the content section of it, which in Virginia is called curriculum framework, and try to see if they can embed some of that kind of information in there. So we made an effort and proposed suggestions. They didn't get adopted. In fact, the curriculum framework that you see that's described here didn't get anything like the play here. In fact, they kind of reduced the language of the curriculum framework in the model that came out just in 2017. That plays kind of lip service to some of the themes that we wanted to hit, but didn't actually have much of the content. But it is the effort that we try to make there. So you can look at those and see things like the case of Wong Kim Ark is mentioned there, or in the Japanese-American internment case, Fred Korematsu, of trying to make sure that those things get truly embedded in there. I love what RJ had to say about, trying to make things that are difficult to talk about a little bit easier to try to get discussed. And that's what you face when you're speaking, especially with state education departments or state legislatures, even more so. In Virginia, our experience is working with the State Board of Education or the Secretary, the Executive Office of the Commonwealth. It's not that bad, but it's state legislators themselves that prove to be the stumbling block. I'm sure some of you who've done this kind of work have discovered that. There's an excellent article that's bookmarked down here, and we'll make this slideshow available through the 1882 Foundation website. But just kind of quickly flash there. I think I can link it up to it. This was in Education Week, this whole article, and it describes a lot of different problems and focuses a lot on Texas and the school board controversies there, where anything that's the least bit controversial gets shot down. It can't really be put, therefore, in the curriculum or in the textbooks that are mentioned there. Back to this. And here's another example. This one I just happened to see out in the newspaper. But teachers are in a tough spot. You want to try to deal with the tough stuff, and at the same time, you have to deal with it sensitively so that you don't offend people. And this was an article, where this come from? Also, Education Week cited this, but you may have heard in the news just recently about some teacher going through a mock auction of slaves and trying to do a simulation about that. Well, from an empathy point of view, that's great, except there are pitfalls, as you can imagine. I don't have to go into any details about it, but how do you treat that kind of subject sensitively? So that's just an area to be very careful of. And I think also, RJ, you're probably going to discover that as you go along, too, as people try out different things. We like the thought process maybe behind it, but you really have to be very careful. Even our governor's wife in Virginia came up with something, and Governor Northam, if you're aware of Virginia politics, has faced all sorts of questions about blackface and other things, but his wife also was presenting something to some education, primary grade students a few weeks back, and gave out little balls of cotton to try to do some kind of simulation and talk to them. She is a teacher herself. But that got her into a fair amount of trouble as well. But we have had success on this institutional level at the legislative thing. For example, the General Assembly in 2016 passed a resolution commemorating Fred Korematsu and Japanese American internment and establishing January 31st of every year as Fred Korematsu Day. Virginia was the first state east of the Mississippi to do that. I think it was only the third or fourth state at that time. Others have followed suit. And this year, we got passed a resolution commemorating the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. That was Delegate Mark King, through our efforts with 1882, lobbying him to be able to put that forward, and that is now part of Virginia legislative history. So these are things that, not is it just a resolution recognizing it, but there is language in one of those whereases that resolutions have, that it must be taught. It has to be included somehow in the curriculum, and the key thing is, that's what it says. How do you get teachers to then actually do that? Speaking about the students part of it, these are two of our interns from last summer. I don't think Beth is here today with us, but that's our Secretary of Education for the state of Virginia, Atif Carney, who is Pakistani American. And so that's kind of an interesting thing here. They met with him. So it's an opportunity for students, in this case, university level, to meet with somebody, but also here we have a sympathetic ear that might be able to do something in that. On the institution level, and is Emma here? Yes, from the Library of Virginia. We partnered with her as part of this Virginia Humanities Grant that we talked about a little bit earlier. And so we were part of the Brown Teachers Institute back in early August of this past year, where we had 50 teachers coming in and who got trained in a lot of this kind of thing, multiplier effect. But being able to work with an institution like the Library of Virginia, and what's interesting is this theme that is prominent here of New Virginians. That is, I think, a really kind of an interesting twist in the way the state of Virginia sees itself through institutions like the Library of Virginia, The Museum of History and Culture. It used to be known as the Virginia Historical Society, but it had a very, very strong history of Confederate themes that ran through that. That changed. They changed the name on purpose to draw to a broader audience. They adopted, or they have the same theme of New Virginians, and what they're talking about really is from 1619 to 2019. 1619 was the arrival of the first African Americans as slaves, or Africans in that case, who became slaves, enslaved people, and that's a recognition down to the present and beyond, because Virginia is a rapidly changing state. Asian Americans are the fastest growing minority in the state, which is true in a number of different places. So this is the kind of recognition by the state that things are not the same as they were. The Virginia Humanities, they gave us the grant, but they are part of that same thing. They're affiliated with the University of Virginia. This is one of their board members. Again, when you have the chance, you can listen to her story, because she's Mexican-American and now serves on the school board of Arlington County. And then this one here, there's a link too that you could look at too that talks more about the New Virginians. Let me see, there's one thing here that, see if you can get this. I don't want to play any, but I just want to kind of show you. Yeah, this was at a gathering where they were actually opening the new exhibition of New Virginians. So, and then another thing that really impacts with the students that I was talking about before is Loudoun County, which is now I think the fastest growing, or has been the fastest growing county east of the Mississippi for a number of years, was the fastest growing county in the country for a long time. But in any case, their demographics are changing rapidly, and they've been hosting an international youth summit every year, and they bring students from 25 different countries, 4 students plus sponsors, so over 100 kids and adults, teachers, who come and visit the United States and stay with host families in the school division. And so we have a chance here to talk with them, do that part of that film presentation that we were talking about before. Paula Madison was the keynote speaker for that event. She's Jamaican, African-American, raised in the Bronx, but also half Chinese, or 1/4 Chinese, I guess. And identifies mainly as black, but she spoke here at Symposium a couple of years ago about her experiences. So this is another way of reaching those students and the faculty. These were the ways, too, in which we trained these international teachers on some of the things that we were doing in curriculum and about the Asian American experience. And so they got to be involved with that. They were from Ireland, South Korea, Australia, South Africa, Bosnia, 25 countries, like I say. Other events, too, where I think we focus on students, these are actually Indonesian American students down in the Richmond area. And the last thing here, really, that I want to show in terms of really expanding out in the community, originally when the documentary, The Chinese Exclusion Act, was shown nationwide on PBS stations last May as part of Asian American Heritage Month, Richmond, Virginia decided to schedule their showing at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we were a little upset because it's really hard to schedule a watch party for Asian American communities around 3 o'clock in the morning. Where do you go? Whose house do you want? So we kind of came down hard on them and said, you need to do something else to make up for this, faux pas. So they created a special screening for us at WCBE Studios, a state-of-the-art studio. We had close to 200 people from the community attend. We had Atif Carney, the Secretary of Education, give just a few brief remarks before the film started. And we also had Scott Tong, who we may know as the reporter on NPR's Marketplace. He hosted a panel discussion with, this is Jean Feltzer, who has written that book, Driven Out, and she's also been part of our symposiums in the past. So this kind of gives you a broad sweep of the kind of things that we feel we've done in trying in Virginia to make that outreach happen, to affect the kind of thinking and change in the community that will bring about the kind of things we want to see happen in our classrooms ultimately. Thank you very much.